This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Natalie Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi is in New Delhi for a BRICS security summit that also includes officials from Russia and Iran. On the agenda, terrorism, cybersecurity and AI risks. Now, the US and Iran have agreed on a 60-day roadmap towards a final deal after encouraging talks in Switzerland. Negotiations will continue this week despite an earlier Iranian walkout. Now, Beijing hits back at Washington's blacklist, imposing export controls on 10 American firms involved in defense and rare earths mining. And the 4th China International Supply Chain Expo opens in Beijing, with China touting itself as a stable partner amid growing trade tensions. Political and business leaders heading to the World Economic Forum's Summer Davos meeting in Dalian, China, set to discuss scaling up innovation and its consequences for society. CNA speaks to the WEF's Managing Director. Plus, a coffee tumbler, a drum at the Great Wall. How two global brands found themselves caught in decades-old historical sensitivities. Top security officials from the world's major emerging powers are converging on India's capital as New Delhi hosts a 2-day BRICS security summit. Now, China's foreign minister is among those attending, along with representatives from Russia, Iran, and other member states. Now, Mr. Wang's visit marks his first trip to India in almost a year, as the neighbors seek to stabilize ties after years of border tensions. And discussions will focus on issues including terrorism, cybersecurity, and the growing security implications of artificial intelligence. And it looks like the meeting will set the stage for the BRICS Leaders Summit in September, where Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin are expected to attend. The BRICS bloc brings together 11 emerging economies, and it represents more than 49% of the global population, nearly 40% of the world's GDP, and more than a quarter of global trade. Now, for more, we are joined now by Ishan Garg for CNA in New Delhi, as well as CNA correspondent Crystal Chia in Shanghai. Well, first to you, Ishan. Well, it looks like the agenda is packed with a whole range of issues. We're talking about terrorism, cybersecurity. So what are some of the key outcomes we should be looking out for over the next 2 days?
Well, the main outcome we should be expecting is seeing how BRICS countries can together address the questions of these non-traditional methods of security risks. We are talking about the threats posed by artificial intelligence, the usage of artificial intelligence in modern-day warfare, things like misinformation and how that's propelled by social media, how that is impacting countries of the global south, particularly the BRICS nations. It would be interesting to see how BRICS countries can put forth a common vision of how they're going to tackle these challenges, given that the BRICS countries often might not see eye to eye on multiple issues, especially when it comes to security. You have countries like India and China, which have competing security interests. You also have countries like the UAE and Iran, which have more than competing interests when it comes to security challenges. So it will be interesting to see how BRICS countries can talk about these issues and perhaps focus on common denominators, things that affect all of them. Apart from this, we're also expecting interesting things to come out of the bilaterals that are scheduled. We understand that India's national security advisor might be holding a meeting with China's Wang Yi, who, apart from being the foreign minister, is also China's special envoy on the question of boundary and border disputes between India and China. And analysts in New Delhi say that there might be likely progress on that front if a bilateral meeting between these two leaders goes ahead.
Right, Crystal, let's hear from you now. We have Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. He's attending the summit. It's also his first visit to India in almost a year. So tell us, what exactly is Beijing hoping to achieve from this visit?
So in statements released just minutes ago, China said that Wang Yi had met with Iran's security official. Now, Wang Yi said that China supports Iran in safeguarding sovereignty and that it is willing to continue to provide assistance in its own way. Outside of this meeting, China has said that it will exchange views with other BRICS members also on the security landscape. For instance, in terms of India-China relations, India is an increasingly influential voice in the global south. This is a region that China has sought to engage in recent years. So China has, on its part, also been working to restore relations. Last year, Indian PM Modi visited China for the first time in 7 years. At that time, he met President Xi on the sidelines of a summit. China has also eased visa applications for Indian travelers. The countries have also resumed direct flights and business links. Now, just in April, for the first time in over 5 years, a delegation of Indian businesses were here in Shanghai. At that time, the spokesperson for the Chinese embassy in India posted on social media, I quote, that the thaw is real. I'll tell you.
Right. So, Ishan, we know for a time now that India and China, they've been working to, steady relations following years of friction. But just how much optimism is there in New Delhi that, these meetings are actually going to produce tangible results?
Well, there is a great deal of optimism, and given all the points that we just heard about from our colleague, that the relationship has significantly improved since 2020, when India and China were involved in a military skirmish over a boundary border question. And we know that these two countries share hundreds of kilometers of long, often poorly demarcated boundaries, and that's something both countries are currently working on solving. Now, analysts here say that there has been substantial progress, and both countries are looking to be increasingly being viewed as strategic competitors in some sense, but not necessarily rivals. And this is also the kind of message that Beijing wants to be sending out in the world. China's ambassador to India, while he was attending an event earlier this year, he said that the perception of India-China should be that these are partners and not rivals. And from New Delhi's standpoint, it's also important to consider that it wants to be seen as a good trade partner of China, given the trade reliance it has on Beijing. It's also important to consider that from New Delhi's perspective, the idea that Delhi and Beijing can work together in multilateral forum like the BRICS also suggests that both countries could be looking forward to building on these ties in the future.
Also now, Crystal, this meeting seen as a precursor to the BRICS Leaders Summit later this year. How important is BRICS becoming, factoring in China's broader diplomatic strategy?
Yes, so China has explicitly labeled deepening BRICS cooperation as a priority for its foreign policy. So BRICS has become increasingly important for China, especially as its relations with the US and other countries become more competitive. Now, BRICS is widely viewed as providing a counterweight to Western-led institutions, and China has often said that it is a test bed for a new style of global governance. And indeed, Beijing reiterated last week that the BRICS countries remain committed to what it calls a more equitable system of governance. Now, the group's recent expansion has also increased its reach. Now it has geopolitical weight across the Middle East and Latin America. Now, Ishan, my colleague, mentioned strategic competitors. And so, indeed, for a group like BRICS, there are also strategic limitations. For example, Beijing would continue to watch India's relations with the US and the Quad. Now, this is especially as India often coordinates positions with the group on security issues, and that Beijing views the Quad as a US-led mechanism to curb its influence in Asia. Now, last month, a BRICS meeting ended without any joint statement, also reflecting divisions this time over the war in Iran. Oteli?
Hey, thank you both for your insights into BRICS security meeting. CNA correspondent Crystal Chia reporting to us live from Shanghai, and also Ishan Garg covering this story for CNA from New Delhi. Now, in other news, the US and Iran enter a second day of talks in efforts to solidify a permanent end to the conflict in the Middle East. Now, an interim memorandum of understanding took effect last week. Mediators Qatar and Pakistan earlier hailed what they described as encouraging progress made during the first round of talks, after American and Iranian negotiators agreed to a roadmap towards a final deal within 60 days. The parties also agreed to the creation of a so-called high-level committee for political oversight, as well as a mechanism to ensure adherence to the termination of operations in Lebanon, as per the MOU. Additionally, Washington and Tehran agreed to open a communications line to help ensure safe passage for commercial ships through the Strait of Hormuz. Our technical talks will continue for the rest of the week. Well, countries have lauded efforts made by all parties involved to work towards a final peace deal in the region. China expressing hopes that the U.S. and Iran will maintain current momentum in talks.
中方支持巴基斯坦、卡塔尔等方所作斡旋努力，希望伊朗、美国双方保持谈判势头，继续相向而行，争取谈判取得积极进展。
Now, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has announced his resignation following weeks of growing pressure from within his Labour Party. The move paves the way for Britain to elect its seventh Prime Minister in a decade. Well, less than just 2 years after winning a landslide election victory, Mr. Starmer says it has become clear that his party wants a change at the top. Nominations to replace him will open on 9th of July, with rival Labour lawmaker Andy Burnham emerging as the frontrunner. His successor is expected to take office in September.
I will remain in post as Prime Minister until the contest is complete, and I will do everything I can to ensure an orderly handover of power. I will also give my successor my full and unequivocal support, knowing that they will inherit a Britain that is far stronger and fairer than the one I inherited 2 years ago, better prepared for the challenges ahead, and better able to ensure the Labour Party secures a second term in office.
Well, pressure on the British Prime Minister had been building for months now, but it intensified after Mr. Burnham secured a decisive win in a parliamentary by-election last week, clearing his path back to Westminster. He says he will put himself forward to enter the contest to replace Mr. Starmer as Britain's Prime Minister, while also thanking Mr. Starmer for his leadership. We're going to go for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, SK Hynix pips Samsung Electronics as South Korea's most valuable firm by market capitalization as AI reshapes the global chip industry. Plus, Hong Kong pushes to open local IPOs to mainland investors seeking to expand cross-border investment links following a crackdown on illicit offshore capital flows. Hello again. Good to have your company this Monday on East Asia Tonight. Well, it is now time for your business news with Roland. And we're talking about bilateral relations between China and the U.S. took a further hit today. Tell us, what are the implications of that?
Yeah, more U.S. companies have been put on the blacklist by China. But analysts say measures from both sides so far are unlikely to significantly derail relations, at least for now. Now, China has imposed export controls on 2 U.S. rare earth producers and restricted trading with several other firms, citing national security reasons. The Commerce Ministry says the move responds to what it calls the wrongful addition of Chinese entities to Washington's Chinese military companies list. The companies MP Materials and U.S. Rare Earth are part of Washington's efforts to diversify supply chains for critical minerals. The restrictions bar Chinese firms from shipping dual-use goods to them, tightening rules that previously allowed exports with government licenses. 8 other U.S. entities are also on the export controls list, including drone makers and robotics and aerospace companies. Beijing says it'll also restrict 46 U.S. firms from government procurement. China's Ministry of Commerce says the measures are in response to the Pentagon adding 80 Chinese firms to its own blacklist, including tech giants Alibaba and Baidu. Washington alleges the firms are aiding China's military, and Beijing denies the claim and has called the move a, quote, malicious practice. The 4th International Supply Chain Expo has opened in Beijing today, and China is using the event to promote open trade and stable global supply chains amid ongoing tensions with some of its major trading partners. The event showcases sectors ranging from artificial intelligence and advanced manufacturing to green agriculture and smart vehicles. More than 670 companies are taking part, with overseas firms accounting for more than a third of exhibitors. And for more, CNA's Rebecca Mateo joins us live from Beijing now. Rebecca, thanks for being on the show. So run us through what were some of the key messages from Vice Premier Deng Xuexiang's speech today.
Now, Roland, Chinese Vice Premier Deng Xuexiang really made it clear that China wants to be seen as a stabilizing force and a force for good in global supply chains. But still, he made several veiled criticisms. Now, this is often the case with Chinese leaders. These remarks were likely targeted at certain countries without explicitly naming them. For one, Mr. Deng said that some countries are focusing too much on de-risking and reducing dependency on single suppliers. He said that this should not be the case, and that they should work towards strengthening mutual trust and more cooperation, not less cooperation. Now, he also made a point about unilateralism and protectionism and said that this would ultimately result in increasing fragmentation risks. And he said that trade wars and tariffs will ultimately benefit no one. Now, Mr. Deng's remarks likely come on the back of the G7 discussing reducing dependence on China when it comes to critical minerals as well as other supply chains. And Roland, if you recall, at a recent summit, EU leaders also backed tougher measures against US, citing trade against China, citing trade imbalance, and that this has been threatening their local industries. Now, we know that the EU are set to discuss deeper and broader about what measures they are going to take to tackle overcapacity and over-reliance on single suppliers. Now, analysts also said that this could spell tensions ahead for China and EU. But Mr. Deng, he defended China's industrial competitiveness, a point that analysts have made. Analysts say the question is no longer whether China remains at the center of global supply chain, but more of how the rest of the world responds to growing China's competitiveness. Now, Mr. Deng says that China's industrial strength comes from reform and opening up, huge market, as well as a complete industrial ecosystem and not unfair advantages. Now, Mr. Deng highlights how China does not only supply, but it's also a mass market for demand. Now, Deng said that he rejects narratives such as the so-called China shock, saying that China is not a source of global disruption, but rather a beneficiary and supporter of cooperation across global chains.
Certainly reinforcing China's role in the global supply chain. This year's Expo also has been dedicated. It's got a dedicated AI zone, I understand. What does that tell us about China positioning itself in the global supply chain when it comes to AI?
Absolutely, Roland. This is the first dedicated AI chain in Expo's history. I took a walk across the exhibition halls and I saw how AI is being used across industries from advanced manufacturing, food processing and logistics. Now, I also saw many robots around, much like the Beijing Auto Show, and I could just imagine how these robots could carry out certain tasks in warehouses, for example. Now, about a third of the exhibitors here are part of the dedicated AI zone. I saw major tech companies like Apple, Alibaba, Nvidia, as well as robotics firm like Unitree. Now, it reflects Beijing's growing focus on using AI to improve manufacturing, logistics, and supply chain efficiency. And in fact, analysts say that China is no longer competing on scale, but rather how to use AI and automation to make supply chains more efficient and smarter. Now, this is particularly significant as technology and AI has become a key area of competition between China and the West. Let's have a listen.
I think one message is that China is going to promote that it is for the benefit of the global economy. So its supply chain is not a threat. It's going to help the world to achieve renewable energy transition faster. This is a positive message. But given all different pushback from emerging markets and developed markets, I think China will also be more visibly presenting the view that is serious about anti-involution. So cutting capacity in the short term is still highly unlikely because of the pressure from domestic job market.
Rebecca, what about businesses? What are businesses telling you about the opportunities and challenges facing supply chains today?
Well, last year, China-US tensions may have been top of mind, but now analysts are saying that China-EU trade tensions are more pressing. I spoke to the president of the EU Chamber of Commerce here in China, and he told me that despite rising trade tensions and weak domestic demand here in China, European companies are still very invested and interested in China, and that's because they are competing against not just the Chinese firms, but multinational companies that are already tapping into Chinese global supply chains. And this is to maintain their competitive edge. And so we are likely to see that these companies will increase their dependence on China. Now, let's hear from the EU Chamber let's hear from the president.
European companies are also concerned about what's happening geopolitically. I mean, we were impacted by the Liberation Day tariffs also. If we are exporting to the United States, we saw what happened with the export controls with the rare earth and magnets. And now, of course, there's also a bit of tension between Europe and China, and who knows what's going to happen later in the year. But overall, I think the major concern right now has been the state of the domestic market and sort of the mismatch between supply and the demand that they have found here in China.
And it's a different case for the American businesses here. I spoke to the American Chamber of Commerce here in China, and they say that they sense optimism among businesses on the back of U.S. President Donald Trump's recent visit to China, but businesses are still relatively looking forward to how things will pan out given the upcoming midterm elections in the U.S., which could affect the dynamics between the two countries. Now, today we saw that as the Expo is taking place, China has announced more measures on U.S. entities. It added 10 American entities to its export control list, and U.S. had also earlier flagged major Chinese firms as linked to the military just a few weeks ago. I asked the chamber about this, and here's what they have to say.
Well, I think it's largely symbolic, and part of that is because the companies that have been listed apparently do not have significant investments in China or significant trade with China. So it's largely symbolic in a sense that it's meant to send a message that China has the rules in place and they're going to implement these rules when they feel it's appropriate. So, I mean, it's something that is indeed of concern, for our member companies.
Now, despite ongoing geopolitical tensions and trade tensions, as well as calls for diversification, the turnout here at the Expo strongly suggests that many companies are still interested in the Chinese supply chain and opportunities in China. Now, the Expo will run till Friday with the last 2 days open to public.
So we're hearing two very different stories there from the US and the EU. Rebecca, thank you for that comprehensive report. Here is Rebecca Mateo reporting live from Beijing. Now, Hong Kong says it's looking to give mainland Chinese investors greater access to its market, despite a recent crackdown by Beijing on unauthorized cross-border trading. The territory's finance chief says it is in talks with Chinese authorities to lower entry thresholds for qualified investors, raise the quota for southbound investments under the exchange's Connect programs, and to expand the products that investors can buy into, including access to initial public offerings. Last month, Beijing came down hard on unauthorized cross-border trading, giving fines to 3 brokers of more than $330 million and ordered non-compliant retail accounts to be liquidated in the next 2 years. SK Hynix overtaking Samsung Electronics to become South Korea's most valuable listed company. The memory chip maker closed up 5.6%, lifting its market capitalization to $1.35 trillion, while Samsung's stock eased 0.14% today. SK Hynix high bandwidth memory are used in AI systems for customers such as NVIDIA and Google. Now, Samsung Electronics' business involves manufacturing logic chips as well as electronics. It is said to be discussing ways to expand sales of its high bandwidth memory chips, which are crucial for AI. Yonhap reports that the company is also reviewing its long-term supply agreements with major customers. That strong demand has translated into record profits and sky-high bonuses for workers at Samsung and SK Hynix. South Korea's central bank now warning that large payouts could push inflation higher. Now, data shows luxury sales and card spending increasing in areas with memory chip facilities. And that is the latest in business at this hour. Otelli.
Thanks so very much, Roland. Well, coming up next on East Asia tonight, participants are coming in droves for this year's Summer Davos in China's Dalian city, with organizers pointing to stronger interest across sectors. We'll find out what's driving the push. You're watching East Asia tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi is in New Delhi for a BRICS security meeting, which also includes officials from Russia and Iran. On the agenda, terrorism, cybersecurity, and AI risks. A second day of talks underway between the US and Iran in Switzerland after mediators reported progress towards a wider peace framework following the first round of negotiations. And in a tit-for-tat move, China imposes export controls on 10 American firms involved in defense and rare earths mining, hitting back at the US blacklist of Chinese companies. Now, China is hosting global political and business figures in a northeastern city of Dalian this week. The key question at this year's so-called meeting of the new champions: can frontier innovations such as artificial intelligence be scaled up to drive economic growth in an increasingly uncertain world? Well, CNA's Tan Tzu-Hui with this report.
It's the 9th time the northeastern Chinese port city of Dalian is hosting what's known as the Summer Davos, the second largest gathering on the World Economic Forum's annual calendar. Participants from government, business, and academia are set to convene this year under the theme of innovating at scale.
Technology and innovation is about the wow factor, but innovating at scale is about achieving the wow factor.
Powered by AI, robotics, biotech, and more, Ms. Neo says the world has already entered a new technological age. The focus this year is on expanding the reach of those breakthroughs so their benefits can be felt more widely across societies.
We are looking at new business models, new operating models made possible by technological advances. But in order for this to be translated into the real economy, into real productivity gains, we have to address the issue of skills, jobs. We have to look at whether the policies are in place to enable and to support new ways of doing things. And also, you also need to have investors.
The meeting also comes at a significant moment for China as the country begins implementing its 15th five-year plan. The blueprint places technological innovation at the heart of China's future growth strategy, of key interest for many attendees.
我们期待年会向国际社会展示中国经济高质量发展的显著成效，传递中国开放合作的坚定信心，分享中国式现代化的广阔机遇。中国的健康稳定发展将为世界注入更多确定性和新动能。
This comes amid an increasingly complex international backdrop, from trade tensions to ongoing uncertainty in the Middle East.
With shifting operating realities that is happening with businesses and also consumers facing somewhat elevated uncertainties and slightly hit confidence due to all the economic anxiety that's happening. The conversations have to be increasingly practical and really targeted on real outcomes and putting them at the forefront. This would be areas such as really realigning supply chains, balancing new energy needs with sustainability goals.
For Dalian, the stakes are also economic. Local officials say hosting the forum has helped attract investment and raise the city's profile as a manufacturing and innovation hub. This year's Summer Davos comes as China's economic outlook remains firmly in focus, with weak domestic consumption and a prolonged property downturn continuing to weigh on the economy. The conversations here in Dalian could offer clues as to where the second largest economy is headed to next and what that could mean for the rest of the world. Tan Si-hui, CNA, Dalian, China.
Well, Chinese businesses are expected to have a bigger presence at this year's Summer Davos. Organizers say they're seeing stronger participation across sectors ranging from robotics and energy to pharmaceuticals and biosciences. Well, CNA's Olivia Seong asked World Economic Forum Managing Director Mirek Dusek what's driving that interest.
We are living through this exponential era when it comes to technological advancement. But then how do you really make sure that this has broad positive implications for industry, society? I think that is the kind of overwhelming imperative for decision makers everywhere. We're also building on the fact that China and Asia overall have been leading not only some of these technologies in terms of R&D, but really leading on how you then scale it. How do you deploy it in industry?
What sort of interest is the forum seeing this year from Chinese businesses?
We have more representation from overall different Chinese stakeholders, leaders from different parts of industry and society. With 15 unicorns that are coming from the Chinese innovation ecosystem, 7 of them are on robotics, so speaks to some of the changes that we're seeing in the topics that are being addressed. But really, it's quite a holistic selection of companies. Of course, energy overall is a big segment. So I think it's a function of being able to really be in touch with the relevant partners.
Well, Chinese officials have repeatedly emphasized themes of innovation and openness ahead of this meeting. But from the stakeholders that you are speaking to, is this message landing?
There is a lot of interest in the world outside China, particularly in Chinese innovation. A lot of people are interested in what are the frameworks, what are the policies that are being deployed, the partnerships between the industry and the government. How is it done here in China in terms of being able to then get to the very robust value chain of innovation that we're seeing emerging here.
To what extent do you think innovation would be able to offset the geopolitical uncertainty that we're seeing around the world?
We have tremendous technologies that we didn't have 10, 15 years ago. So yes, in certain instances, technology can help. For example, you see that the deployment of technology or AI even in the supply chain business is actually helping quite a lot in maybe diminishing some of the detrimental effects that we have seen in, when countries are having bigger barriers to trade. But at the same time, we all know that that's not panacea. There is at least a realization on the part of sovereign actors that yes, we all have our national security imperatives and considerations, but we also want to find ways maybe to be a little smarter about what actually cooperation means.
If we were to sit here at the end of this year's event, what would you say would be a positive outcome, in your opinion, from the organizer standpoint?
When we say deploying innovation or innovating at scale, really having, number one, hopefully providing a better understanding what that actually means across the different sectors in an economy, if you will, and then really a commitment on the part of the different decision makers that we hear too. There's a lot of decision makers here in the Congress Center to really then try to work on that enabling framework, maybe different investment models, really thinking through what it means for people.
Time now for a short break, but up next on East Asia Tonight, from South Korea to China, two brands face criticism over symbols tied to the past. We find out why history remains a powerful force for global brands. Hello again. You are watching East Asia Tonight, and we're talking about global brands spending millions tailoring campaigns for local audiences. But sometimes a single word or symbol can actually spark a backlash. And in recent weeks, two major brands have learned just how quickly history can shape public reaction. In South Korea, for instance, Starbucks promoted its new Tank Day Tumbler series on 18th of May. Now, that date marks the anniversary of the 1980 Gwangju uprising, when pro-democracy protesters were killed during a military crackdown. Well, the campaign's timing and its use of the word tank struck a nerve for many South Koreans, triggering public outrage. Well, Starbucks Korea has since apologized and removed the promotion. Well, that backlash, though, led to boycotts and protests and a subsequent drop in sales. Today, Starbucks Korea has shut more than 2,000 stores for 3 hours so that staff can attend lessons on Korean history and social sensitivity. The temporary closure is expected to cost the company about $1.4 million in lost sales. Now, a similar controversy unfolded in China. Sportswear brand Lululemon organized a promotional event at the Great Wall, and it featured a drum that critics said resembled a Japanese taiko drum rather than a traditional Chinese one. At such a symbolic sight, many said that it revived memories of Japan's wartime invasion of China. That criticism also spread rapidly online. Lululemon removed their promotional content and apologized, saying it had failed to identify the potential controversy during planning and that it would be more careful in the future. Two different controversies, but pretty much the same lesson. Historical memory still shapes how people view symbols, slogans, and cultural imagery today. So why do certain images remain so sensitive decades later? Well, for more, I'm going to bring in CNA senior correspondents Lim Yun-suk in Seoul, as well as Tan Yu-Guan in Shanghai. And let's just kick things off with you first, Yun-suk. That Starbucks backlash rooted very much in a different historical context. But why are references linked to South Korea's democracy movement so sensitive after so many years?
Well, I think to understand why this struck such a nerve here in South Korea, I think you have to remember that South Korea's democracy is still relatively young. And it wasn't won, gradually through political reform, but it was fought for through years and decades of protests and sacrifice. And, many who lived through that period are still alive today. Even I remember coming back to Seoul during my summer holidays while studying in the U.S. in the 1980s. And I don't remember a single day without protests out in the streets and riot police firing tear gas. And that's why these aren't just, historical events. They're living memories for millions of South Koreans here. And then there was that slogan, put it on the table with the sound of tak. Now, that immediately reminded many people here of one of the country's most famous political cover-ups. Because in 1987, there was a student activist called Park Jong-chul, and he died after being tortured by police. But the authorities falsely claimed then that he collapsed after an officer hit the desk with a tak sound. And that explanation really became a symbol of this dictatorship lies and helped fuel the democracy movement here in South Korea. So when you have those two references appear together, many South Koreans just felt that this campaign failed to respect the sacrifices behind South Korea's democracy. And so whether intentional or not, that's why you had this reaction that was so emotional here in South Korea.
Yes, very distasteful, as some would say. Yu-Guan, let's talk about that Lululemon controversy, right? I mean, help our viewers understand why did it struck such a nerve, and also, I guess, more deeply, what does it tell us about the historical memory of Japan continuing to shape public sentiment in China?
Well, the sensitivity here comes from a combination of symbol, setting and timing. The setting is the Great Wall, after all. It's one of China's most powerful national symbols. And it comes at a time when China-Japan relations are already under strain over Prime Minister Takaichi's remarks that any attack on Taiwan would threaten Japan's security. What's more, you must remember that memories of Japan's brutality during World War II is very much still alive in China. I mean, I personally have experienced, seeing parents bring children as young as just toddlers to the museums like about the Nanjing massacre or even about human experiments in Harbin. So these memories are very much alive. So the backlash is really not about whether Lululemon intended to offend, but it's also whether a global brand had done its homework when trying to leverage on a powerful Chinese symbol for its marketing. And here's what an expert has to say about this.
When a company chooses such a symbolic value and emphasizes the cultural elements, it also takes on the responsibility of getting those details right. So as we can see, the devil comes from the details. China's market is more sophisticated, more digitally connected, and more culturally confident than it was a decade ago. Public reactions can spread very quickly through social media, and consumers are paying close attention to how brands communicate. The companies that succeed are usually those that invest in local expertise, local management teams, and a genuine understanding of Chinese culture. So in today's world, a multinational company must be globally consistent, but locally intelligent. Global consistency plus local intelligence. This is like a secret sauce.
So for global brands in China, cultural sensitivity is no longer optional. It's part of business risk management and also a requirement for commercial success. Oteli?
Now, Yoon-suk, what's also surprising was just how quickly the Starbucks controversy actually blew up and, was taken up by these politicians, civic groups, as well as mainstream media.
Well, yes, that's right. And, what really stood out wasn't just this backlash, but it was really how quickly this online controversy became a national issue. And it really all started with the social media, where users quickly connected this campaign to South Korea's democracy movement. And as those online posts spread, the mainstream media picked up the story, bringing it to this wider audience. And then you had the politicians, the civic groups, and all the democracy activists all weighing in, and they were all arguing that this campaign showed a lack of understanding of one of South Korea's most painful history. And even President Lee Jae-myung, publicly criticized this incident. And you also had the government agencies and the public institutions start to distance themselves from Starbucks. And that matters because here in South Korea, this democracy movement isn't viewed simply as, something history, something in the past, because it is being seen as the foundation of South Korea and the people, the people live in this country today. So once this controversy became associated with that history, expectations changed. You had South Koreans expecting this company not only to apologize, but also to show that it understood why South Koreans were offended. And that's why Starbucks Korea, responded. They went far beyond this typical corporate apology. And in an unprecedented move, it shut all its stores nationwide today from 3 p.m., not simply to educate the employees about South Korea's modern history, but also to show South Koreans that it understood why so many people were offended. And that showed that the company recognized that this wasn't just about fixing a marketing campaign, but it was also about trying to build trust by showing respect for the struggle that helped build South Korea's democracy.
So, Yuguan, these controversies periodically involve brands, celebrities, and foreign companies, and they're accused of misunderstanding Chinese culture and history. The question is, are consumers becoming more sensitive now, as what Yoon-suk said, because, social media plays such a part in amplifying such reactions?
Yes, social media certainly plays a major role. Chinese consumers today are more vocal, more digitally connected, more willing to call out foreign brands when they feel cultural or historical sensitivities have been mishandled. But in China, online reaction also does not develop in a vacuum. After all, this is a space where comments that are not viewed favorably by the state would be removed by the tech companies pretty quickly. because these tech companies are profit-driven as well, and they too do not want to get into trouble, and hence they will police their social media space on the state's behalf. So in that way, the state shapes the narrative online. And in Lululemon's case, it doesn't help that the drum in question carries such loaded symbolism. Here's what another political watcher has to say about the episode.
So during Japan's feudal era, especially in the 15th to 16th centuries, the taiko drums were used extensively in the Japanese military, including for troop coordination, to raise troops' morale, as well as to intimidate the enemies. So considering the fact that Sino-Japanese relations have hit its lowest ebb in recent years, especially with PM Sanae Takaichi's leadership ascension, any hawkish signals pertaining to Taiwan as well as the Japanese self-defense forces will be viewed with an even heightened sensitivity in China. And we must also be aware that wartime memories within China have not faded and existing grievances have not been resolved. So for Lululemon to include the taiko drums, that has certainly struck a raw nerve within the Chinese leadership. The perception of consumers in China are largely shaped by the governments, especially since they drive the media. And I believe thereafter their views reinforce the government's position on certain issues. And on top of that, there is a very active group of citizens that are very devoted to defending the government's position on these issues. And this, in a way, regulate the narratives on the internet.
And we're seeing this, shaping of the narrative offline as well. It showed up at the Shanghai International Film Festival, which just closed over the weekend. For this year's festival, it was what the audiences here didn't get to see that really made the headlines abroad. For the first time in 20 years, there was no Japan Film Week. Much to the disappointment of some film buffs we spoke to. You can catch the report on YouTube or CNA.Asia. Now, ahead of the film festival, we also saw the chill affecting another movie, Demon Slayer movie. A few months earlier, it earned roughly $100 million at the box office in China. That's a strong run, stronger than, say, like Jurassic World or Mission Impossible's final sequel. And yet it ended its theatrical run in early December last year without an extension. So even in the case where there is clear Chinese demand for Japanese pop culture, the political climate has pretty much become too hard to ignore. Otelli?
Well, we'll certainly be looking out for that story. Thanks so very much for your time and thoughts, Tan Yu Guan in Shanghai, and also our CNA senior correspondent Lim Yun-suk in Seoul. And that's pretty much all we have for you for this Monday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at CNA.Asia. And you can find us on all our socials, including YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. For our Singapore audience, do stay on for highlights from the FIFA World Cup matches.
Egypt have made history with the first ever win at the World Cup, beating New Zealand in Vancouver. But it was the All-Whites who took the lead in the 15th minute. The Pharaohs staged a second-half comeback to secure the historic victory, Mustafa Ziko equalizing in the 58th minute before talisman Mohamed Salah got the second in the 67th and Trezeguet the third in the 82nd minute to send Egypt to the top of Group G. Earlier, Iran held Belgium to a goalless draw in Los Angeles. Team Mali came closest to scoring off a planned piece of brilliance, only to see the effort ruled offside. Frustration got to the Red Devils, who were reduced to 10 in the 66th minute when Nathan Ngoy saw red for illegally stopping a goal-scoring chance as the match ended 0-0. European champion Spain got the World Cup campaign back on track, thrashing Saudi Arabia for their first win in Group H. Lamine Yamal opened the scoring in the 10th minute. Mikel Oyarzabal then hit a quick-fire brace in the 21st and 24th minutes to put Spain 3 goals ahead. Hassan Al-Tambakti's own goal made it 4-0 minutes into the second half, as Spain shook off the shock goalless draw to Cape Verde in the first game with a thumping victory in Atlanta. But Cape Verde pulled off another surprise in the group, this time against Uruguay, scoring their first ever World Cup goal through Kevin Peña's free kick in the 21st minute. But the Uruguayans stormed back before the break, Maxi Araujo with the 44th minute equalizer, before setting up Agustin Canobio to give Uruguay the lead 7 minutes later. The Blue Sharks equalized again in the second half, pouncing in the 61st minute on a shock goalkeeping error, the match ending in a 2-2 draw.